Hi, I'm Kat at Magoosh, and today I've put together a list of tips for you to help you succeed on the English section of the ACT. So let's start with the first one. Very important, learn comma placement. Okay, so on the English section, you're going to see 75 questions. You're going to have 45 minutes to answer them. And what you might not know is that almost 50% of those questions are testing you on two general areas. The first is sentence structure, and the second is punctuation. All right, well, guess what? Commas appear in both of those, sentence structure and punctuation. So what do I mean when I say learn comma placement? Well, where are some of the places that we see commas? Where do they appear? Before conjunctions that separate two independent clauses. All right, so that's a big one, and that's one that a lot of people forget. By the time they're freshmen in college, I've seen many of them forget on their term papers all the time. So if you know that, you're going to have a huge advantage. Next, separating items in a list. And a lot of us know this, but one of the big questions that comes up, and it's something for you not to be too concerned about, is whether or not to put a comma before the last and the second to last items in a list. So usually we have the last item, and right before that we have the and. You know, I buy milk, eggs, and butter. So is there a comma right before the and? It doesn't matter. It really varies based on who you ask. And so what does the ACT do? The ACT does not test you on that particular item. Okay, so you want to have commas between items on a list, but the very last comma that comes before the and might be there, might not be there. You're not going to be tested on it, so don't worry about that one. Just know that there are commas between other items in the list. Before quotations. So this is if the quotation begins partway through a sentence. You might say, father turned around and said to me, comma, quotation. And sometimes you'll have commas at the other end of the quotation marks as well. So you're going to want to study the rules for those. We have commas separating cities from state. We're here in Berkeley, California, comma between the two, and then between the date and the year. Okay, so those are just a few places that you want to brush up on, and this one on top in particular, make sure you know that one. Next tip is maintain optimal alertness. Okay, so what do I mean by this one? Well, what I find with students is that a lot of students err. It's not really an error, but there are tendencies in one of two general directions. One is to be really nervous, really tense, really freaked out. Okay, so that's being overly alert. We call it hyperarousal sometimes, right? If you're in that situation, if that's your tendency, you want to practice some stress reduction techniques. So that can be deep breathing, it can be just self-talk, it can be humor. I tell people to, look at the test and look at how ridiculous some of the examples are. Find some humor in the situation. Other people, just as many, quite honestly, have the opposite problem, which is that they tune out, they space out, they don't care, it's kind of boring, they want it to be over. So if that's you, you want to employ a different technique. You want to try and get yourself jazzed up. You might want to tap your foot a little bit. I like to tell people to imagine that there's a cash reward tied to the question you're about to answer. Okay, so that's managing your alertness to make sure that you do the best you can on test day in that middle zone. Third is skim paragraphs before reading questions. A lot of people don't realize that on the English section in the ACT, there actually are kind of like passages. People expect there to be passages in the reading section, but there are passages on the English section as well. What you'll find is that those passages are testing you not on content of the passages, but on potential grammatical errors, on punctuation errors. And a lot of students just want to jump right into the first question and start answering. But it's been found now, and I can say this, it has been scientifically studied by people, and they've found that students do better if they skim first. Used to say to students back before this research was confirmed that either way works. You can either start with a question, start with a passage. We now know that it's better to skim the passage first, and only after that begin reading and answering the questions. Okay, this is a very simple, kind of silly one, but it's still a great tip to know. Bend the corners of your test book. Okay, so on the English section, we have the most questions of any section on the exam. You have 75 questions to answer in 45 minutes. So that means if you're skipping around, skipping a question, going ahead, making your way back to answer those questions you skipped, you're going to be flipping through the book a lot. And it might seem like a very minor thing, but you don't want the pages to stick together. So just bending them a little bit as you turn, don't put a lot of time into this, but when you're turning the pages, give them an extra little bend so they're easier to separate later. And then last tip, and I'm going to give you some concrete examples of this, the tip is to use grammar rules whenever possible. Okay, so what do I mean by that? You might have heard this advice, and it's good advice, that you should follow your intuition, okay? Or that on the English section, you should think about what sounds right to your ear and answer that way. Well, that's really good advice if you don't know the grammar rules that apply. If you know the grammar rules that apply, you want to go with the rules, not with your intuition. Unfortunately, because many times the right answer does not sound correct. And so I'm going to show you some examples of this. We have these verbs to lie and to lay. And when we're talking about the first, to lie, I'm not talking about lying like deceit or falsehood, but to lie down, to assume a horizontal position. We have the present tense of that is just lie. I lie in bed late on Saturdays, present tense. Past tense is lay, and that doesn't always sound quite as right. So last Saturday, I lay in bed all day. Could be right, but some people might not go that direction if they don't realize that that's the past form of to lie. And that's often confused, the verb to lie gets confused with this other verb, which is somewhat related, to lay. And so when we're talking about this, we're talking about moving something so that it is in a horizontal position. So the first one is to assume a horizontal position. I lie down, the bottle is lying down. So anything, it doesn't have to be a person. When we're talking about to lay, we are actually placing something maybe on its side. So we lay down a baby, or we lay down bricks when we're building a brick building. The present tense is lay. So some people have jobs that involve laying bricks, or that requires a knowledge of how to lay bricks. The past form would be, when I was a babysitter, I laid down many babies. That sounds really weird, doesn't it? But it's actually the past tense of to lay. And so make sure that, I think this is just a really good one to memorize. The difference between to lie and to lay, present and past. So let's try these out, all right? I'm going to give you some questions, and I'm going to ask you to fill in the blank with one of 4 words. So the 4 choices, there are going to be 3 questions here. The 4 choices are lie, lay, laid, and lain. Question number 1, the professor blank our graded essays on the table. Number 2, the boat has blank on its side ever since it capsized. Number 3, I'd be happier if I had blank down to rest earlier. Okay, so try to come up with your answers to these questions. They do go a little bit beyond what we covered on the slides that I held up just a second ago. And to get an answer, all you have to do is click on the link in the description. You're going to see the answer. You're also going to see an explanation as to why each answer is correct.